Drop the tool and step away from the vehicle. Now!
Officer, this is my car. I'm not a suspect. I'm the owner.
I said don't talk. Turn around or you will be tased.
You're making a serious mistake. I am compliant. Check the plate.
Hands up now.
I'm compliant. Look, keep off in his hand.
Officer Kyle Braden had been patrolling the streets of Charleston, South Carolina for 6 years when he made a decision that would not only end his career but would cost the city's taxpayers a staggering $6.4 million. He was 29 years old, a man who wore his badge with a swagger that suggested he believed his authority was absolute. He had come to view the citizens of his district not as a community to be served, but as a collection of potential threats to be neutralized. On a bright, cloudless Saturday morning in May, Braden received a dispatch call regarding a suspicious individual at a self-service car wash. The subject was described as a black male potentially stripping parts from a high-end vehicle. The subject was in fact Colonel Marcus Thorne, a 54-year-old retired Marine Corps officer and a recipient of the Silver Star, who was lovingly polishing the chrome on his own car. What Braden did next, bypassing protocol, ignoring reason and assaulting a decorated veteran in broad daylight, would become a definitive case study in how unchecked bias and arrogance can dismantle a police department's reputation in a matter of minutes. Before we dive into the details of this infuriating case, take a moment to let us know in the comments, where are you watching from today? And if you believe that those who enforce the law must be held to the highest standard of the law, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button. We are committed to bringing you the stories that the mainstream media often overlooks, and your support is what keeps this channel alive. The incident occurred at the Suds and Shine Auto Spa on Savannah Highway. It is the sort of establishment that caters to car enthusiasts, the weekend warriors who prefer to wash their vehicles by hand rather than trust them to the scratching brushes of an automatic tunnel. It was 10:30 a.m. The sun was high, reflecting off the wet pavement. The bays were full of people spraying down SUVs and sedans, the air filled with the smell of soap and tire shine. It was a peaceful, mundane scene of American life. But Officer Braden didn't see peace. When the call came in, his mind immediately painted a picture of criminality. He didn't hear man washing car. He heard perpetrator. He didn't consider that a black man in a mechanic's jumpsuit might be a hobbyist working on his own property. He assumed with the fatal confidence of the prejudiced that he was heading toward a felony in progress. He turned on his siren not for safety but for intimidation, and pressed his foot heavy onto the accelerator. He was looking for a fight. He had no idea that the man he was rushing to confront had survived combat zones that would have made Braden's toughest patrol shift look like a kindergarten recess. Braden was about to learn a very expensive lesson about respect assumption and the Constitution. To understand the magnitude of the mistake Officer Braden was about to make, you have to understand the man he was targeting. Colonel Marcus Thorne had spent 30 years in the United States Marine Corps. He had led battalions in Fallujah and Helmand Province. He had organized logistics for humanitarian missions in the Pacific. He was a man who lived by a code of honor, courage, and commitment. He had retired 2 years ago with a full pension and a chest full of medals, including the Silver Star for gallantry in action. At 54, Thorne was physically imposing, 6'2", broad-shouldered, with the kind of posture that comes from 3 decades of standing at attention. He kept his hair high and tight, his face clean-shaven, and his demeanor calm. Thorne's pride and joy was parked in Bay No. 3, a pristine raven black 1967 Shelby GT500. This wasn't just a car. It was a piece of history that Thorne had spent the last 5 years restoring with his own hands. He knew every bolt, every gasket, and every stitch of the leather interior. He had bought it as a wreck and brought it back to life, a project that had helped him transition from the chaos of war to the quiet of civilian life. That Saturday morning, Thorne was wearing a gray mechanic's coverall with his name embroidered on the chest pocket, a habit from his service days where organization and identification were paramount. He had the hood of the Shelby popped open. He wasn't stripping the car. He was detailing the engine block using a toothbrush and a specialized degreaser to ensure the Cobra Le Mans valve covers were spotless for a car show scheduled for the following afternoon. He moved with a slow, deliberate rhythm. Wipe, inspect, polish. He was in his element, enjoying the warmth of the sun and the satisfaction of honest work. The Suds and Shine was relatively busy, but Bay 3 offered a bit of seclusion at the end of the row. Thorne preferred it that way. He didn't want overspray from other cars hitting his fresh wax job. He had his supplies neatly organized on a rolling cart he'd brought with him. Microfiber towels, folded in quarters, labeled spray bottles, a socket wrench set, just in case he needed to tighten a hose clamp. He was the picture of a responsible, meticulous car owner. To anyone with a modicum of common sense, he looked exactly like what he was, a man who loved his car. But common sense is not always common, and perception is often clouded by a filter of deep-seated bias. While Thorne worked, he was being watched, and the eyes watching him did not see a veteran enjoying his retirement. They saw a threat. Todd Miller was 38 years old and had been the manager of Suds and Shine for 4 years. He spent most of his shifts inside the air-conditioned glass office that overlooked the wash bays, scrolling through his phone and occasionally shouting at teenagers to turn down their music. Miller considered himself the guardian of the establishment, a man who could spot trouble from a mile away. In reality, Miller was a man possessed by a nervous, unfounded suspicion of anyone who didn't fit his narrow definition of a typical customer. From his vantage point in the office, Miller had been fixated on Bay 3 for 20 minutes. He saw a black man in coveralls leaning over the engine of a car that Miller knew was worth upwards of $200,000. In Miller's mind, the equation didn't balance. He reasoned that people who owned cars like that didn't wash them themselves. They paid detailers. He reasoned that people who owned cars like that didn't wear mechanics' jumpsuits. He ignored the fact that Thorne had arrived in the car driving it into the bay. Miller had been in the bathroom when Thorne pulled in, so he hadn't seen the arrival. He only saw the current scene, a black man with tools under the hood of a Shelby. "He's stripping it," Miller muttered to himself, pacing the small office. "He's taking the engine parts right here in the bay." It was a ludicrous assumption. Who would steal engine parts in broad daylight at a busy car wash with cameras everywhere? But bias does not require logic to thrive. It only requires an opportunity to manifest. Miller watched for another 5 minutes, his heart rate climbing. He convinced himself that he was witnessing a grand theft auto ring in action. He picked up the phone and dialed 911. 911, what is your emergency? Yeah, I need police at Suds and Shine on Savannah Highway. Miller said, his voice trembling with self-importance. I've got a suspicious character here. He's dismantling a classic car in one of my bays. I think he's stealing parts. The dispatcher asked for clarification. Is he acting aggressively? Has he threatened anyone? No, but he's got tools, Miller said, embellishing the narrative. He's got wrenches and he's tearing the engine apart. It's a Shelby GT500. There's no way it belongs to him. He looks like he doesn't belong here. Does he belong here? That is the question that lies at the heart of so many of these encounters. Miller had decided based on nothing but skin color and clothing that Colonel Thorne was an intruder in a space where he was actually a paying customer. The dispatcher logged the call as a suspicious person, potential theft in progress. That was the information beamed to Officer Kyle Braden's patrol computer, and that was the spark that would ignite the powder keg. Officer Kyle Braden was already in a foul mood when the call came in. But more concerning than his mood was his record. In his 6 years with the Charleston Police Department, Braden had accumulated 9 internal affairs complaints. For a patrol officer, that number was astronomical. 4 of them were for excessive force. 5 were for discourtesy or biased policing. There was a pattern to Braden's conduct that should have been obvious to anyone in the chain of command. He targeted minority citizens in affluent areas. 2 years prior, he had detained a black real estate agent who was showing a home in the historic district insisting she was a squatter until her white clients arrived to vouch for her. That complaint was sustained, resulting in a written reprimand and a one-day suspension. Another incident involved him tackling a Hispanic delivery driver, who he claimed looked like he was fleeing when the man was simply jogging back to his truck. Despite these red flags, Braden remained on the street. His union representative was skilled at arguing that Braden was simply proactive and tough on crime. His supervisors, overworked and understaffed, often looked the other way, prioritizing arrest statistics over community relations. They noted in his file that he needed to work on his interpersonal communication, a euphemism that grossly understated the danger he posed to the public. Braden had learned that he could push the envelope, that he could escalate situations, and that the department would ultimately protect him. He felt untouchable. So when Braden saw the dispatch details, black male stripping vehicle suds and shine, his confirmation bias kicked into overdrive. He didn't think to ask questions. He didn't consider observing the situation first. He viewed himself as the thin blue line between order and chaos, and he was determined to make an arrest. He sped down Savannah Highway, weaving through traffic, adrenaline pumping through his veins. He wasn't going to investigate. He was going to conquer. He pulled into the car wash lot at 10:42 a.m., tires screeching slightly as he braked. He spotted the Shelby in Bay 3 immediately. He saw the man in the gray jumpsuit, and in that moment, Braden decided the outcome of the encounter before he had even opened his car door. Colonel Thorne heard the siren cut off abruptly, followed by the crunch of tires on gravel. He didn't look up immediately. He was focused on a stubborn spot of grease on the intake manifold. He assumed the police were there for a traffic stop on the main road, or perhaps a fender bender in the lot. It wasn't until he saw the shadow fall over his engine bay that he realized the attention was directed at him. Thorne straightened up, holding a microfiber cloth in his left hand and a small 10mm wrench in his right. He turned to see a young police officer, Officer Braden, standing 10 feet away, hand hovering near his holster stance, wide and aggressive. "Step away from the vehicle," Braden shouted, his voice cracking with intensity. "Drop the tools and step away from the vehicle now." Thorne blinked, his expression remaining calm. He had faced insurgents armed with RPGs. A shouting 29-year-old with a badge did not induce panic. He slowly lowered the wrench to the rolling cart, keeping his movements deliberate to avoid startling the officer. "Officer," Thorne said, his voice a deep baritone, steady and controlled. "I am the owner of this vehicle. I'm just detailing the engine." "I said step away." Braden stepped closer, invading Thorne's personal space. "I'm not going to ask you again. Get back against the wall." "There is no need for shouting," Thorne said, not moving back. He stood his ground, not out of defiance, but out of dignity. "If you lower your voice, we can resolve this. My registration is in the glove box. My ID is in my back pocket." "Do not reach for anything," Braden screamed. He was escalating, feeding off his own manufactured tension. He saw Thorne's size and his calm demeanor not as compliance, but as a threat. In Braden's mind, a suspect should be nervous, cowering. Thorne's composure felt like a challenge to his authority. "You are detained for investigation of grand larceny. Put your hands where I can see them." "Grand larceny?" Thorne frowned, a flash of irritation finally crossing his face. "Son, I restored this car. I have the title at home and the registration right here. If you just take a breath." "I am not your son," Braden snapped. "Turn around now." The other customers in the car wash had stopped what they were doing. The sprayers went silent. People were watching. Phones were coming out. A woman in the next bay shouted, "He's just washing his car. He's been here for an hour." Braden ignored the witness. He was tunnel-visioned. He closed the distance, grabbing Thorne's arm to spin him around. Thorne didn't flinch, his muscles rigid. "Officer, you are making a mistake," Thorne warned, his voice dropping an octave. "I am a colonel in the United States Marine Corps. You need to unhand me." I don't care if you're the president, Braden spat. You're under arrest. The physical contact was the tipping point. Braden, realizing he couldn't easily manhandle a man of Thorne's stature, panicked. He let go of Thorne's arm and immediately drew his taser. The bright yellow weapon was leveled at Thorne's chest. "Get on the ground!" Braden yelled. "Get on the ground or you're gonna ride the lightning!" Thorne looked at the taser, then at Braden's eyes. He saw the fear and the aggression there. He knew that any sudden movement would result in him being tased. Slowly, with immense dignity, Thorne turned toward his beloved car. He placed his hands on the roof, careful not to scratch the paint he had just polished. "I am complying," Thorne said loudly for the benefit of the cameras now recording him. "I am not resisting. This officer is using excessive force." Braden holstered the taser and grabbed Thorne's wrist again, twisting it behind his back with unnecessary force. He shoved Thorne forward. Thorne's hip collided with the front fender of the Shelby. The metal buckled slightly under the impact, a dent in the pristine bodywork. Thorne winced not from pain, but from the sound of his hard work being damaged. "You dented my car," Thorne said through gritted teeth. "Stop resisting." Braden shouted the universal cry of an officer trying to justify rough handling. He slapped the handcuffs on Thorne's wrists, tightening them until they bit into the skin. He kicked Thorne's legs apart, patting him down aggressively. "Stolen valor, huh?" Braden sneered, finding the wallet in Thorne's pocket but not opening it yet. "Claiming you're a colonel. You know that's a federal crime, impersonating an officer. You're going away for a long time, buddy. Stealing a Shelby and lying about your service." The crowd was getting louder. "He's telling the truth," a man in a baseball cap yelled. "We saw him drive it in." "Back off," Braden shouted at the crowd. "Or you're next for obstruction." Braden keyed his radio. "Dispatch 1 in custody. Suspect is non-compliant and hostile. Send backup." Thorne stood handcuffed against his car, his head high. He didn't struggle. He didn't scream. He waited. He knew the system. He knew that Braden had just dug a hole so deep that he would never climb out of it. Thorne began to memorize the badge number, the time, the procedure violations. He wasn't just a victim. He was a tactician, and he was gathering intelligence for the battle that would come in the courtroom. The backup arrived 3 minutes later. It was Sergeant Reynolds, a shift supervisor with 25 years on the force. Reynolds was 55 years old, a man who had seen it all and had little patience for rookie mistakes. He saw the scene immediately. The crowd recording the beautiful car, the man in the mechanic's jumpsuit handcuffed, and Braden looking frantic and sweaty. Reynolds walked up, his eyes scanning everything. He looked at Thorne. He saw the haircut. He saw the bearing. He saw the Thorne embroidered on the coveralls. "Braden, what do we have?" Reynolds asked, his voice calm. "Caught him stripping the engine," Braden said breathlessly. "Tried to resist. Claimed it was his. Claimed he was a Marine colonel." Reynolds looked at the car. The hood was up. Detailing supplies were laid out neatly. This didn't look like a chop shop operation. This looked like a spa day for a car. Reynolds walked over to the rolling cart. He saw the expensive waxes, the microfiber towels. "Did you run the plates?" Reynolds asked. "Not yet. I detained him for safety first," Braden said defensively. Reynolds sighed. He walked to the back of the Shelby and called in the tag number on his portable radio. "Dispatch run tag Sierra Tango 559. The radio crackled back instantly. "Tag returns to a 1967 Shelby. Registered owner Marcus Thorne. Status valid. No warrants." Reynolds closed his eyes for a second. He felt a pit in his stomach. He looked at the man in handcuffs. "Sir," Reynolds said to Thorne, "what is your name?" "Colonel Marcus Thorne, USMC, retired." Thorne replied clearly. "My military ID is in my wallet, which Officer Braden currently has in his pocket." Reynolds turned to Braden. "Give me the wallet." Braden hesitated, his face losing color. "Sarge," he was, "give me the wallet." Braden handed it over. Reynolds opened it. There it was, the Department of Defense identification, the retired officer card, and the driver's license matching the registration. Reynolds looked at Braden with a mix of disbelief and fury. "You arrested the registered owner of the vehicle. You have a colonel in handcuffs for washing his own car." The manager said," Braden stammered. "I don't care what the manager said," Reynolds snapped. "You verify. That is day one stuff." Reynolds walked behind Thorne and unlocked the handcuffs. "Colonel, I am removing these restraints. On behalf of the Charleston Police Department, I apologize. This is a severe misunderstanding." Thorne rubbed his wrists. He turned slowly to face Braden. He didn't yell. He spoke with the cold, hard precision of a commanding officer addressing a subordinate who had failed completely. "Officer Braden," Thorne said, "you refused to look at my identification. You refused to listen. You damaged my property. You assaulted a federal officer. You have disgraced your uniform. I served this country for 30 years to protect the rights you just trampled on. You are not fit to wear that badge." Braden stood there silent, the realization of his catastrophe crashing down on him. The cameras were still rolling. The crowd was silent now, listening to the dress down. The body camera footage was released 4 days later. It did not take long to circulate. The image of a young, arrogant officer manhandling a calm, decorated black veteran became the lead story on every major news network. The hashtag #HatchColonelThorne trended for a week. The fallout was swift and absolute. The Charleston Police Department, faced with undeniable video evidence and a public relations nightmare, moved quickly. Officer Kyle Braden was placed on administrative leave, and following a swift internal investigation, his employment was terminated. But it didn't end there. The review board found his actions so egregious that they petitioned the South Carolina Criminal Justice Academy to decertify him. Braden's name was added to the National Registry, ensuring he would never work in law enforcement again. Todd Miller, the manager of Suds & Shine, was fired by the corporate ownership of the car wash chain. The company issued a public apology and donated $50,000 to a veterans charity, but the damage to their local reputation was permanent. Locals boycotted the location for months. Colonel Thorne sued the city and the police department for false arrest, excessive force, and civil rights violations. His legal team argued that the department had been negligent in retaining Braden despite his pattern of behavior. The city attorneys looked at the 9 prior complaints, looked at the video of Braden denting the Shelby, and realized they had no defense. They settled for $6.4 million, one of the largest payouts in the city's history. But as Colonel Thorne stood on the steps of the courthouse after the settlement was announced, he didn't look triumphant. He looked tired. He spoke to the press, his voice somber. "I don't want the money," Thorne said. "I want to be able to wash my car on a Saturday morning without fearing for my life. I wore the uniform of this country. I bled for this country. And yet, in my own neighborhood, I am still seen as a suspect first and a citizen second. That is the wound that money cannot heal." Thorne's words linger because they strike at the uncomfortable truth of our society. It asks us to consider the price of bias, not just the $6.4 million paid by taxpayers, but the human cost of dignity stripped away. It reminds us that for some, the war doesn't end when they take off the camouflage. It continues on the streets of the cities they swore to defend. What do you think? Should police officers lose qualified immunity when they bypass standard procedures like verifying ID? And should people who make racially motivated 911 calls face criminal charges for filing false reports? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, if you believe in accountability and justice, please hit that like button and subscribe. It helps us continue to shine a light on the truth. Thank you for watching, and stay safe out there.